An offensive explosion for the Hornets last night. 72 bench points for Charlotte. Ridiculous. Must win. They got it done. I tell you, this was a must win. And they were able to get it done. We'll recap it all today. Locked On Hornets.
You are Locked On Hornets, your daily Charlotte Hornets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
It's Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Thanks for making us your first listen. We're free. We're available anywhere you get your pod, and that does include YouTube. There's Doug Branson. You can find him on his Substack, everyhornetsboxscore.com. But he's also, I would say, the official writer of the newsletter. I think you're the curator of that as well. And your favorite podcast now has a newsletter introducing the Locked On Hornets daily newsletter, one step, one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right into your inbox. Sign up for free now at lockedondaily.com. That's lockedondaily.com. Start your day with the all-new free Locked On Hornets newsletter. I'm Walker Mail. You can listen to me on WFNZ every weekday from 12 to 3 p.m. And I did want to give a quick special shout out to FanDuel because you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, Doug, 138 to 133. Just a ridiculous score, a sicko score. The Hornets, they do end up winning last night. They beat the Toronto Raptors. They score 30 or more points in every single quarter. To put 138 points into context, it was more than any amount they scored last year by 10. By almost, excuse me. So the Hornets scored 129. Excuse me. They scored 129 last year against Brooklyn, November 30th. So almost by 10. It was the second most amount if you go back to 2 years ago when they had a couple of crazy games. They scored 144 against the Hawks and then another game where they reached 138. So pretty crazy. And I guess, Doug, that's what happens when you just chuck up a bunch of 3-point shots and you have a few guys that reach 25 points, 20 points, and you still don't have Brandon Miller. You don't even have Mark Williams out there, but no problem with the bench going for 72. Pretty ridiculous game, roller coaster game, but thank God the Hornets got it done.
Yeah, I called the game against Atlanta a circus, so I don't really know where to go from there. But this game, I think, far exceeded that. This was pretty insane, and you called it an offensive explosion. You could certainly look at it like that. You could also look at it like a defensive implosion, particularly in that second quarter. I mean, they have an amazing first quarter. They're up 30 to 16 going into the second quarter. They allow Toronto to score 43 points, and a vast majority of that was in transition. Nick Richards said at halftime, we didn't run back for like the last 10 possessions. And that's particularly a problem, Walker, when you're a team that's coming off of 3 days rest, right? You can't blame it on second night of a back-to-back. You can't blame it on travel. You can't blame it on, well, it's a long season. Guys are, feeling the grind. It's game number 4 for the Charlotte Hornets, and they're not getting back. So, yeah, I mean, there were some issues. Obviously, the story was the bench scoring in this game, and they absolutely needed it. They got 25 points from Cody Martin, 27 from Tre Mann off the bench. Grant Williams was great, 17 points. It felt like every time the Hornets started to let the lead lapse or just get behind, that Coach Lee would call for Grant Williams to come off the bench. He was daddy. He was the adult in the room. He was the guy that Lee went to when everything was falling apart multiple times in this game. Big game for him. Miles Bridges, absolute no-show, 7 points. I don't know. Honestly, I legitimately don't know what was wrong with Miles in this game. There's an illness going around. Vasa Micic missed a game. I think there was another player that missed a game with illness previously. So I don't know if he wasn't feeling good or what, but he did not look like the Miles Bridges that we had seen kind of step up and take a lot of shots and offensive responsibility in place of Brandon Miller. And so, other than some hot spurts for LaMelo, he was sort of fading into the background and facilitating for some of these bench players.
Well, okay, so a couple of things. You mentioned Vasa Micic just real quickly. He was available. He was added to the injury report with an illness, but it was clarified that he was available. He just didn't play. So maybe out of the rotation, Vasa Micic.
We got to keep an eye on it, because if it's is it, everything's so ambiguous. Is it like, well, he's available to play, but he's not like 100%, so we don't want to push it. You know what? We got to keep an eye on it.
That's fair. Rod Boone reported that he was added to the injury report, but that he was available if need be. I don't even think the words were if need be. Just he was available, didn't play, didn't need him. I will say that offensively at least, and probably would have hurt. Right? I don't know how much he would have helped with this team, but just like focusing on the bench for a moment, if you're a North Carolina basketball fan, then angry Roy Williams would oftentimes just put his starters on the bench and do a hockey change where you just go straight up 5 bench players and put them all out there on the floor, like a real sicko lineup for all of you Hornet sickos out there, with putting Moussa Diabate and Tijan Salon on the floor at the same time. Salon going in for 16 minutes of run. They get first quarter run, and the bench unit really is what sparks this lead for the Hornets early on, where you see them start to separate themselves from the Raptors, and it really wasn't the starters that were getting the job done early on. So I've said that a million times. But yeah, with what you saw from Nick Richards, I thought he had a great start. I thought like 5 rebounds early, good denial in the post to lead the game with a steal. You saw him getting back and running out in transition, at least offensively, but also just making sure that his presence was felt down low. He also had a nice stretch at the end of this game too, or in the second half. Tre Mann was excellent. He was someone that they had to rely on quite a bit, and he continues to be a fan favorite. It really was the guys coming off of the pine with that one just nuclear 3-point shooting stretch from LaMelo Ball in the second quarter. Yeah, like those are the things that got it done.
I got a text from Sean Woodley of Locked On Raptors that was like, it must be really difficult to cheer for a guy like LaMelo Ball when he's like so great, but he also does clown bleep. And he was talking about the heat check that he took, after scoring like 4 straight threes. He goes for the heat check, which is just an absolutely absurd three that like you wouldn't want anyone taking, even these guys like Luka and others that take these ridiculous threes. Like, it was an absurd heat check. But at the same time, by the way, I texted back. It's not hard. It's not hard to cheer for anyone with that level of talent when you're a Charlotte Hornets fan, by the way.
Well, and it felt like, so what did he go in the second quarter? Was he 3 of 6 from 3? The thing is, the last 3 that he had made before that other 100% heat check, he made it. Like, he was going crazy for a second in that second quarter. And so I was like, hey, let it fly. If he would have made that, Doug, Spectrum Center would have gone absolutely nuts.
Yeah, totally. And look, I mean, you're not going to be mad at 138 points, but they scored that against a Toronto team that is depleted, was missing several of their starters, and they're not going to win that game against literally any other team. I mean, maybe they win that game against Washington, maybe against Detroit. Right. Yeah. But I mean, this is not a win. You take every win and you go, thank you to the basketball gods, particularly when you're dealing with injuries to 2 starters. But there are a lot of things that they have to work on. Transition defense being one of them. Taking care of the ball. I mean, again, these are issues that we can root back for a couple of seasons now, but certainly to this preseason, taking care of the basketball. I mean, LaMelo Ball, 6 turnovers in this game. And, I think you have some questions about the shot selection. He got absolutely torched by virtually any matchup he took on defense. And the defense had problems adjusting to that. Nick Richards, again, great game. What did he finish with? 24-14. It's an interesting game for him because he was, in terms of game score for pivotfade.com, he was 28.4. That led all Hornets, including those bench bees that we've been talking about. But he was a minus 15 for the game because the starters were so awful.
Right,
he had 4 blocks, but he keeps leaving his feet on defense. Like, there's just like, again, Nick Richards is like ultimate facts of life player. You got to take the good and take the bad. There was a lot of good in this game. 24 points, 14 rebounds, 4 assists on 71% shooting. But in critical possessions down the stretch, he was leaving his feet and fouling guys and being out of position on defense. So it's just, it's one of these things where you throw up your hands and you go, all right, well, they got to win, regroup. Hopefully Lee can get these guys to run back on defense.
Let's get to some other observations coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast. Let's focus a little more on Tre Mann, and there's just no way you can trade Mann after what he's been doing at the beginning of the season, and we'll give you some other notes that we have as they squeaked out a close one, but they got it done again. All right, that's all still to come. Locked On Hornets. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can get ready to tackle the second half of the NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5, get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. More Locked On Hornets ahead. Wanted to give a quick shout out to a couple people I ran into last night. I was a fan, Doug. I did the fan thing. I wasn't one of those pesky media members. I went out there and got to take in all the action. Brendan.
You took off your hat? Do you have a hat that says media on the front of it and you took that hat off?
No, I didn't wear a hat last night. Yeah, I didn't. Usually I would put on the fan hat. I don't wear a hat when I go as a media member. But I didn't even wear a hat last night. I had my Hornets
You should
hoodie.
wear one of those like old-timey reporter hats when you're a media member. And then fan, you got to go with like, one of those like sort of crazy-looking cowboy hats or one of those hats with like the nacho dip on the top, or a beer hat.
That's how you know. Yeah, that's how you know. Could have had just a couple Modelo's on either side of me, sipping them without no hands. Look, Ma. But shout out to Brendan, Alex, Josh, and I think I met a couple of other people, and I apologize for the quick exchange that I was not able to get your name. But I do appreciate you guys listening, man, and I'm glad that we're able to talk about a victory over the Raptors because it was an important one. We went over it, right? I'm not going to bring up must-win for the third straight day and talk about it in depth. But it was important because the Celtics are back-to-back Friday, Saturday, even if it is at home. Those are going to be tough matchups. And then you have a road game after that against Minnesota. So I am glad, even if it was ugly. You're right. God, I mean, you expected after they just not hit a bunch of threes, bench unit came in and was gangbusters. You expected the Hornets to maybe win by 20 or 30. It felt like this thing could get out of hand. And Toronto, not even so slowly, Doug, like not even so slowly did they chip away and come back. If the Hornets don't score almost 140, then they don't win this game because of how bad their defense was. But I guess this is kind of how you get some of these high-scoring games in regulation the way they did.
And it's interesting, after the game, I didn't know what Charles Lee we were going to get. He's been generally jovial, positive, even amongst the two losses that they've had. He's found a lot of silver linings in the post-game press conferences. So I didn't know if we were going to get a peeved Lee after this one because, a lot of what they were displaying out there, excuse me, seems to run. Yeah, no, it's phlegm season, guys. You're just going to have to bear with me. That's a fine. I'll find the hat.
But, a couple fines.
I know, but I tried to work through it. At least see that's the difference between me and the Hornets last night. I was trying desperately to work through it, and they seemed to be rolling over. At least the starters.
All right, proceed.
Okay, so a lot of what they did or didn't do last night seems to run contrary to what Lee has been preaching since he got here, which is like commitment to running back on D. Well, he calls them non-negotiables, but in that game, they very much looked like they were negotiable. So I didn't know what we were going to get, and he still remained positive. So I don't know. Hopefully something is happening behind the scenes where he's like getting into these guys and doesn't want to, come out so early and do it in the media. So we'll see there. But yeah, I mean, they're obviously this team is a team in which you're going to have a group of games. A couple of them are coming up against Boston where you're going to run into teams that are so talented that they're really, it doesn't matter what kind of Hornets team they run out there. It's going to most likely get bulldozed. And then there's going to be, I think, a large group of games against teams in various situations where if the Hornets come out the more aggressive team, if they come out the more focused team, then they're going to give themselves an opportunity to be in those games. And it's going to come down to a balance here or there. And so this game shouldn't have been that game. It should have been in some other category of like, the Hornets have more talent right now than the Toronto Raptors, and they should just go and take care of business. And instead, they let Toronto be the more aggressive team, particularly in the second and third quarters.
I like the way you phrased that because it leads me to this question. I think we finally got what seemed to be a pretty general criticism of Charles Lee's coaching last night. Are you a fan? Bringing up Roy Williams again. Are you a fan of the let your team play through struggles, or would you like for Charles Lee to call a timeout to stop what eventually would become an 18-2 run in the second quarter? You also experienced a 13-2 run at the hands of Toronto pouring it on you, and Charles just seemed a little excessive, not wanting to call those timeouts. There's one time he got away with it where fans were clamoring for it, doesn't call it. Tijan, actually, I think it was Tijan, who saves a possession with his offensive rebound, scores the bucket, and then Toronto calls the timeout. So actually navigated that one pretty well. Do you have any problem with letting his guys play through it as much as he did?
So here's what he said about it after the game. He was asked about it. He said, it was a little bit of the timeout situation. I took a quick timeout to challenge something, and so that's the first media timeout, and then now you got to wait until the 3-minute media. And I believe they called a timeout in another stretch. So I was kind of sitting there just trying to be smart with our timeout situation. I also thought our group was going to be able to kind of like organize ourselves and use some of the dead balls to kind of settle ourselves down. So okay. I think that a problem that Charles Lee is going to run into early on, and I think it's a problem that he's going to work through with the Hornets and whatever version of the Hornets they eventually land on when they find out which guys are going to be bought in and ready to be like Charles Lee disciples and which ones aren't. But I think a problem that he's going to have early on is that he's going to treat this Hornets team like they're the Boston Celtics. He's going to treat this team like it's playoff ready, and he's going to like overthink some of these situations in terms of like, well, I got to save my timeout here. I got to do X and Y and Z. And I can allow these guys to police themselves. I think he's going to find out pretty quickly that he's going to have to do a little bit more policing than he had to do, or that Missoula had to do in Boston, or that anyone that he was involved with had to do in Milwaukee. I look, everybody's learning. It's a young team. They're going to be learning a lot from Charles Lee, but Charles Lee's going to be learning a lot from this experience as well. He probably learned a lesson there that, hey, sometimes I've got to be the bad guy. Sometimes I've got to police this team.
So, and I think what we talk about, and I've made this parallel between Dave Canales and Charles Lee, I do think both of these guys are honest. Just because we view them as positive, it doesn't mean that they're not honest. And I'm sure Charles Lee isn't going to take his team to task with what he does in front of the camera or what he does at the podium. I do think that he'll tell his team exactly what he wants them to know, at least behind the scenes and in the locker room. So I'm not too worried about that with Charles. I was ready for a timeout. I was one of those people who were like, okay, it's what is this? Like 14-2, 16-2, 18-2. I don't even know when the timeout would have come within that run, but it was a long one. And then they went through it again. If it had gotten to 40-2,
if it had gotten to 40-2, I'm pretty sure he would have called a timeout.
You think? He's got to let him play through it, man. You know, yeah, maybe that's the case. Last thing before we move on. All right, maybe we'll do it here. Tre Mann. Tre Mann was excellent again, and you texted in the LOH group chat. You cannot trade Mann. You just can't do it. And like with Micic and Tre Mann being these two guys that were supposed to be somewhat of a debate in who would be the lead guard off of the bench, it's been clear for quite some time. And even if Tre Mann had that award already won, like he has clearly separated himself. But now I don't want him off of the team. Now you want the inside track to be able to match any salary that's given to him because he's a restricted free agent. And if you trade him, now you're talking about, like, Doug, a pretty important piece with some of these deep playoff team runs where they can go to a guy off of the bench and they can be a 6th man of the year candidate. Maybe they just have that guy in training with Tre. I'm with you. I would really like to not trade what has become a clear fan favorite.
I'm not glad that you're with me, though, because I'm worried now. I'm worried I'm doing the thing that I said I wouldn't do and that I was worried about fans doing, which is falling in love with Tre Mann and falling so deeply in love only to have him be
happened.
torn away from us because the Hornets have grander plans and, are trying to make 3D or 4D chess moves. And they end up, I'm worried that the Hornets will make a bad move here, sending Tre Mann in some kind of trade to acquire, whatever they want to acquire. But yeah, I've fully fallen in love with him. I mean, the shot that he hit, he was kind of falling a little bit out of bounds. He got some contact. He lost the ball midair and somehow still hit the mid-range jumper. And then there was a drive where he just like bulldozed one of the skinny, 6'9" Toronto Raptors defenders that they somehow cloned back in the they have like 9,000 of them that they just cloned back in the locker room. But he shoved that guy out of the way on a drive. I mean, he's playing so much more physically than I recall him playing last year. Like I thought he was like a good scorer last year, but I thought he was timid at times. That he has shed all of that. He is playing with uber confidence, uber physicality on the offensive end. He's a dog on defense, getting steals, getting the Hornets into transition. I mean, there's just I don't even know what to say at this point. I want him to be on this team forever, and I don't want the Hornets to take him away from me. Please don't.
I got some finishing thought. No, don't cry. I got some finishing thoughts on that. Coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Bees everywhere!
If I can't cry, you can't cry. I will not allow it. One more segment to go. I have finishing thoughts on Tre Mann, and then also, we have to talk about my love for Moussa Diabate, just coming in and mixing it up at the center spot. Miles Bridges, too, the struggles, and maybe focus a little more on what LaMelo did. That's all still to come here on Locked On Hornets. All right, so here we are watching the Hornets barely hold on because of what the bench unit did, and Tre Mann was one of the big reasons here, watching what he was able to do, trying to pull up his point. It was 25 points for Tre in this game, and his stat line.
I can give you a quote from Charles Lee while you look that up.
27, by the way. Go ahead.
27, full. Okay. He said about Tre Mann after the game, it's huge for us to be able to have a guy that can score in bunches. If they want to put pressure on Melo and put their best defender on Melo, now all of a sudden Tre can be our secondary ball handler. And that was huge in that game because Toronto did aggressively double LaMelo Ball. And so, like, I think it's a problem when LaMelo Ball this is going to sound weird. I think it's a problem when LaMelo Ball goes on a heater like he did in the second quarter, because it like forces the other team to wake up and be like, oh, we gotta, man, this phlegm is killing me.
Yeah,
we gotta like aggressively double LaMelo Ball now, and that's what happened in this game.
Yeah, no, and LaMelo, he was looking for a shot. He was rushed, I think, because of maybe some of that doubling at the beginning. There was a time where he had 2 long go-ahead passes that did not connect. Charles, and then I think because he was frustrated, did not get back on defense. So there was a real rough stretch for LaMelo in that first quarter. Charles Lee, during a timeout, during a break in the action, spoke one-on-one with Melo and said, calm down. I was actually right there. So where I was sitting, it was usually media is on the opposite end of the Hornets bench. Where I was sitting was right on the tunnel, and so I could see Charles Lee start to talk to LaMelo and say, hey, settle down, everything's fine. There was a one-on-one moment between those two, and LaMelo played much better, but there was that rough, 5-possession stretch where there's some pretty egregious turnovers, just allowing the Raptors to hang in, even at the very beginning of this game. Grant Williams, while he was good, there were also some pretty bad decisions that he made with the basketball in his hands. And it just feels like, Doug, there are a couple of dudes I don't trust dribbling the basketball, and they've had the basketball in their hands a little too much. I think Cody Martin, while having a phenomenal game, Cody hitting a bunch of threes, and I guess more so maybe offensively for Cody, but Cody hit a bunch of threes. He was active on the boards again. How many did he finish up with? Cody had some key rebounds. I guess there was the one key offensive rebound that he finished up with, but got to the foul line, hit 3 of his 4. But Cody dribbling the basketball, don't love it. Tijon Salon dribbling the basketball, don't love it. Grant Williams dribbling it, don't love it. And yet we saw quite a bit of that because that's what you do when you go to your entire bench unit. You have Tre Mann and Cody Martin as your ball handlers. Yeah, you're going to deal with some turnovers. Like you have some shooting, you have some rough and rugged style play, but you're going to deal with some turnovers. And it felt like they were giving you that with Cody and Grant having a couple of them. But luckily, Tre Mann is able to help you out in that department.
Well, that's also going to happen when you went into the season thinking that you were going to get some semblance of what Vasa Micic gave you last season, and you haven't. So we don't know exactly why he didn't play in this game, but he hasn't been good at all at scoring the basketball, but even in taking care of the basketball, Vasa is turning it over a ton as well and not looking like himself. And so, yeah, if you lose that guy, there aren't many good alternatives. Like your guards are your options are Nick Smith Jr., who's not getting any minutes right now, who has not traditionally been a very good passer. They just didn't come in with a plan that involved not getting anything from Vasa Micic. So, I don't know if that's going to continue and what adjustments they have to make to get the ball in some other guys' hands, or it just has to be LaMelo Ball settling down and not turning the basketball over a ton. Brandon Miller, I don't think fixes that. Like, I mean, he can initiate a little bit more of the offense, but he's not a big facilitator right now. Mark Williams, I mean, he could catch the ball a little bit better than Nick Richards. So, I mean, I think that would help, some of those bad pass turnovers that may be credited towards guards and not necessarily Nick Richards. But I don't see either of them coming in and fixing that problem.
I do think they're better decision makers, even if Mark Williams clearly isn't an ISO guy. Go give it to him out on the perimeter. And Brandon Miller, I think he's a good enough screen navigator. That's where he works and operates. I think that you have good enough decision makers with those two guys coming back, where Nick is not going to have the best hands, where with some of these other guys dribbling the basketball, you don't feel nearly as good. But you're right. Overall, yeah, it's probably not going to fix the problem 100%. Rapid fire, Miles Bridges, did not shoot the basketball well at all in this game. He was not a part of the 138-point party. He did not contribute much at all. What'd you make of Miles Bridges' performance?
Yeah, I would not be shocked if he was feeling under the weather or something was wrong, because we've just seen a version of Miles that, particularly like right when Brandon went out, that first game, was Miles Bridges being aggressive on both ends of the floor. And I didn't see that version of him in this game. And so I'm just going to chalk this one up and hope that he typically plays well against Boston. So I think we're going to see a much different version of Miles. He typically doesn't have, if I think back to last season, like I can't recall too many times where he strung like horrible games back to back. So, I think he's going to have a bounce back game. And, he's probably been asked to do a lot in those two games without Brandon. So I don't know. But off of 3 days rest, it is strange.
Yeah. Cody Martin, Tre Mann, Seth Curry, LaMelo Ball, Nick Richards all played more than Miles Bridges last night. And Miles had 0 personal fouls attached to him. 0 fouls. Well,
I'll say this too. Like the guy that, I mentioned Grant Williams getting subbed in, but, as a sort of an adult in the room, like when things were going poorly. Typically the guy that he was subbing in for was Miles Bridges. And you could point to several of those defensive errors in the second and third quarter. I mean, there was to start that run in the second quarter for Toronto, it was a miscommunication between Miles Bridges and LaMelo Ball on a high pick and roll. And there was just 0 communication really in transition and guys not running back. And I identified Miles on a few of those. And that's why I say, like, Miles is good for like falling asleep on a back cut here and there. But generally I view him as a guy that is like committed to playing hard on the defensive end. And so, I don't know. I hope it's something like that, because it was a very odd game. I'll just say
last thing to end on, Josh Green. I want more minutes for him, and I'm not going to be able to get it. Josh Green continues to ice his Achilles when he's on the bench. He went back to the locker room. This feels like something that they're going to be nursing for quite some time. And I guess I don't know how long it's going to happen. I just know in the meantime, when he plays, he's going to be icing that Achilles. But Doug, I thought he was really good. You talk about active. I mean, he only played 22 minutes, but I was drooling when you were looking up the corner three stats for Josh Green, and it's not even like he's amazing at it. He's average, but again, it's been a real problem area for this Hornets squad. Well, you saw Josh Green hit some corner threes last night. I thought you saw him really active, whether it was his assignment, whether he was helping somebody else, but he just didn't play a whole lot, and I don't think we're going to play him as much as we want to, and I bet Charles Lee wants to play him a lot more, but they just have to manage this injury where he doesn't play a couple games already. The games that he does play, he's icing that Achilles. I hope that we get through this sooner rather than later, because I think Josh Green helps this team quite a bit. And the passing, I thought his passing really set the table for some of this stuff, which I know is an underrated skill. You could see it on display last night.
In transition, I mean, I think his highlight of the game, I mean, the corner three was good, but the highlight of the game was the pass that he made, the alley-oop that he gave to Nick Richards in transition. That was fantastic, and it was
after corner three. Like, that was a heavy Josh Green sequence.
Bang, bang.
Just that's right. It was
bang bang, and then I need some ice because
yeah, that's right.
Well, look, man, we talk a lot about like what's it going to take to get big time free agents to Charlotte. It's an attractive city. If you like quiet, it's a cool place. It's a cool city to come to. People don't bother you. What are the advantages that Charlotte could provide? But one of the big disadvantages is that you come here and you get injured. Like, it's just like, I don't know what's going on. I feel so bad for Josh Green. He didn't ask for any of this. He got traded here. So
I really liked
him. Now
man.
he's a victim of whatever curse, whatever Paul is on the House of Hornets,
House
of Horrors. It's Halloween. So I hope he gets back to 100% as quickly as possible. I mean, the performance staff, they've invested a lot of money in it. They're being put to the test early here. They're obviously being careful with guys. I think they're taking a long-term approach to this season. I think if they had any notion that this team was going to like compete for an Eastern Conference Finals, that a lot of these guys would be playing more minutes and Brandon Miller would already be back. But I think they're taking a long-term approach to, wanting to see what these guys can do all season long as opposed to losing them for huge stretches.
Sure.
So, I think it's the right move, but I'm with you, man. I mean, Josh Green, when we get him 100%, it's going to be really fun to watch.
Absolutely. That'll do it for Locked On Hornets. Thanks for making us your first listen. We're free, available anywhere you get your pods, and that does include YouTube, everyhornetsboxscore.com. Go check it out. That's Doug's Substack. You can also check out his subtext information there and then read the newsletter, the daily newsletter delivered right to your inbox if you sign up today at Walker Mail. You can follow me on Twitter and also check me out on WFNZ every weekday from 12 to 3 p.m. on Wes and Walker. Have a great rest of your day. We'll be back with you tomorrow.
Be gone, Flem!